Good day everyone, we are the group 5 and we will be tackled about a glance at selected Philippine political caricature in Alfred McCoy's Philippine cartoons, which is political caricature of the American era 1900s to 1941. With the members of Kayla Pasco, Nicole Hapitana, Krisha Arnaiz, Angel Salbibia, Jetro Tomayan, Camille Francisco, and yours truly, Risis Ann Combate. So, Philippine political cartoons gained full expression during the American era. So, Filipino artists recorded national attitudes toward the coming of the Americans as well as the changing mores and times. So, it's about 377 cartoons was compiled in the book of Political Caricature of the American Era 1900s to 1941 by the historian Alfred McCoy. And here are some of the information of Alfred McCoy. He was born in June 8, 1945. He's an American historian and educator. Fred Harvey Harrington Professor of History at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1989. A director of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in European History from Columbia University in 1968, a Master of Arts in Asian Studies from the University of California, Berkeley in 1969, and a Doctor of Philosophy from Yale University in 1977. So these are his publications, including Philippine Caricatures in 1985, Anarchy of Families 1994, Closer Than Brothers, Manhood at the Philippine Military Academy in 2000, A Question of Torture, CIA Interrogation from the Cold War to the War of Terror, and this was published in January 2006. So, damo pa ni siya books, pero amo lang ni ang akon nga ging include. So, these are the example of political cartoons that was made during the American era. So, these particular cartoons would speak about the truth of the American occupation here in the Philippines during the American era. And also it speaks about the situation of the Filipinos and also the Philippine nation during the occupation of the American here in the Philippines. Some of these particular cartoons are somehow funny to look at, funny to see, pero may deep meaning na siya behind that cartoon. And these are just an example lang siya, pero may ari kita diya specific cartoons nga need ta i-analyze. And these cartoons was also formed as media or commentary about the historians during this era or the particular people to targeting the authority into those who were in power during this era. So now let us proceed to our first political cartoon. The public post is not a hereditary crown. So the cartoon shows a politician from Tondo named Dr. Santos passing his crown to his brother-in-law Dr. Barcelona. A Filipino guy was trying to stop Santos. Amo na ang nakasuksok sa lakot kag barong Tagalog. Telling the latter to stop giving Barcelona the crown because it is not his to begin with. So, to analyze these first political cartoons, it talks about politics. So, the crowns represents as the Philippines. It symbolizes the sovereignty that the Filipinos should have. But sa Treaty of Paris, ang Pilipinas, we all know this that the Philippines was sold by the Spaniards to the Americans. And we know that the Filipinos, especially the government of Emilio Aguinaldo, we Filipino try to express our opinion, try to oppose these things to happen, pero wala tamay nahimo that time because there are no Filipinos during the Treaty of Paris. There is no representatives ang Pilipinas. So, the crown as sovereignty was really given to the other. So, parang yung colonization galing sa Espanya, ipinasa na naman sa mga Amerikano. So, pagkatapos ng Espanya, which is they colonized us in 333 years, then here comes the Americans. So, what was happened sa time na Americans naman ang nag-handle sa Philippines. So, and here's our second political cartoon. This was published on Independent in June 16, 1917. War Against Speculator. This was drawn by Fernando Marsolo, a Filipino child who stole a skinny chicken because he had nothing to eat. The police officer was relentlessly pursuing the said child. A man wearing a salakot named Juan de la Cruz was grabbing the officer, telling him to leave the small-time packets and thieves and to run at the great thieves instead. He was pointing to huge warehouse containing bulks of rice, milk, and grocery products. We need to understand the history in the occupation of American here in the Philippines is also the beginning of modernization and industrialization. So maybe Karl Marx was right, with which the democratic countries or the upper class were controlling the economy, they were controlling the natural and economic resources of a particular country. Our second political cartoon, it speaks about inequality. It speaks about the gap between the poor and the rich. So, it's sad to say lang na until now here in the Philippines, it's still happening. So, there is still inequality and somehow the rich are getting richer while the poor are getting poorer. So, during the American era, amo naman na siya gali ang system sa Pilipinas, and until now, there is still an inequality here in the Philippines. So, parang yun yung ibig sabihin ng second political cartoons. And now, let's proceed to our third political cartoon, that Cars. The Philippines Free Press published this commentary when fatal accidents involving colorum vehicles and taxis occurred often already. So, during the American era, and also the Americans are the one who brought about transportation, automobiles. So, during this era, and because of the rapidly changing of the society, so there na di siya may conflict na di siya since ang policy, ang laws is limited. And diri man na din nagadamo ang kolorum or ang mga registration, mga license. So that is somehow the analysis of this third political cartoon. And now let us proceed to our fourth political cartoon. To analyze this cartoon, it talks about liberalism and conservatism. So during the colonization of Spaniards, na-adapta ang conservatism, or that time is conservative baya ang mga tao. Even mag-holding hands or kissing in publics, though skandal na niya sa ila. But during the Americans, sang sila na ang nag-handle sa Philippines, so na-adapt ang liberalism. Kay ang mga Americans is liberated, right? So that is somehow the analysis of this political cartoon. It talks about, or it's like contradicting between the liberalism and conservatism. So now let us proceed to our fifth political cartoon. Based on the event in 1907 when William Howard Taft brought to Manila Pier, riding a chariot pulled by the students of Liceo de Manila, and this event was condemned by the nationalists at that time. So the Americans was controlling or subjugating us as a Filipino during the American era through brainwashing, using harmless mentality, sweet words, but behind that words is dark motives gali. So balisang una is uto-uto gitagaliya. That's why the American was controlling us, was subjugating us. So here's our last political cartoon, which is El Torno Los Partidos. So these cartoons was showing, it shows what kind of society and politics we had during the American era or under the American. But we didn't understand the essence of democracy, and even until now, diba, there are still parties. Kada mag-election bala, diba, there are different parties, the nationalist parties, the federalist parties. So we didn't understand that time or during the American era that division cannot bring good to society. So that is somehow the analysis of this political cartoon. And that's the end of our analysis of this particular political cartoon that was compiled by the historian Alfred McCoy.
So let us move on to our next topic, which is identifying and knowing the history and background of those people who is mentioned earlier. So first, we have here Alfredo Rosas. So, he is a Filipino post-war and contemporary painter who was born in 1932. He is a painter who started with a figurative style but soon began to amalgamate expressionism. He uses Fauvism and Impressionism in his painting. He is known by author of his latest book titled Looking for Liling. He is also known and an award-winning veteran journalist who has worked in newspapers, magazines, and also authorized several books in the Philippines and its art. Second one, we have Fernando Amarsola. He is a portraitist and painter of rural Philippine landscapes. Nakilala man ni siya or minikname ni siya ang Grand Old Man of the Philippine Art. He was the first ever nga nakilala or recognized as national artist of the Philippines. He was born on May 30, 1892 and died on April 24, 1972 in the age of 79. Our next topic is Uncle Sam. Just to clarify you, Uncle Sam is not a person but a symbol nor representation of the U.S. government in American culture. This cartoon has a concept that the Philippines is being exploited by the U.S. This picture is a symbol of a Filipino child that gapakita nga incapable ang Filipinos ng self-government. Uncle Sam is depicted as a wealthy older man who exploits Filipinos. This painting represents as dominance over the Philippines.
Okay, good day everyone. My name is Kyla S. Pasco and I'm the one to tackle about the document analysis about explaining why, where, and when the document was written or made. So first, when was the political caricature of the American era written? Philippine cartoons, political caricature of the American era in 1900s to 1941. Philippine political cartoons gained full expression during the American era. Filipino artists recorded national attitudes towards the coming of the American as well as the changing mores and times, while the 377 cartoons compiled in this book speak for themselves. Historian Alfred McCoy, extensive research in Philippines and American archives provides a comprehensive background not only to the cartoons but to the turbulent period as well. Artist writer Alfred Roses, who designed the book, contributes an essay on Philippines graphic satire of the period. Why political cartoons made by Filipino during American era are important? So first is Philippine political cartoon gained full expression during the American era. Filipino artists recorded national attributes toward the coming of the American as well as the changing mores and times, because it's highlighted issues such as dynastic politics, patronage, economic disparity, and the transition from a Catholic Spanish Filipino society to an American assimilated one. And where the Philippine political caricature was made. Political cartoons and caricature are a rather recent art form which veered away from the classical art by exaggerating human feature and poking fun at its subjects. So such as art, genre, and techniques become a part of the print media as a form of social and political commentary which usually targets person of power and authority. Next is cartoon became an effective tool of publicizing opinions through heavy use of symbolism, which is different from a verbose written editorial and opinion pieces. So, this is a graphic with caricatures of public figures expressing opinion and every significant event in our history. This is a combination of artistic skills, hyperbole, and satire in order to question authority and draw attention, corruption, political violence, and other social ills that is worthy of historical examination. The unique way that a caricature represents opinion and capture the audience imagination is reason enough for historians to examine these political cartoons.
So, to summarize our topic about a glance of selected Philippine political caricature, and Alfred McCoy's Philippine Cartoons, Political Caricature of the American Era. Alfred McCoy is a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin, where he also served as a director of Center for Southeast Asian Studies, specialized in Philippine political history and global opium trafficking. He spent the past quarter of his life writing about the politics and history of the opium trade. Political cartoons and caricature are rather recent art form, which varied away from the classical art by exaggerating human features and poking fun at its subjects. Such our genre and technique became a part of the print media as a form of social and political commentary, which usually targets persons of power and authority. Cartoons became an effective tool of publicizing opinions through heavy use of symbolism, which is different from a verbose, written editorial and opinion pieces. The unique way that a caricature represents opinion and captures the audience's imagination is reason enough for historians to examine these political cartoons. Commentaries in mass media inevitably shape public opinion, and such kind of opinion is worthy of historical examination. So, did you know that political caricature of the American era earned an awards such as Philippine Catholic Mass Media Award, Best Book of the Year for 1985, and Philippine National Book Award for History in 1986. And also he got an award from Gintong Aklat Award Manila Special Citation for History in 1897. That's all. Thank you.
Now, let's move on to the analysis of our report. Analysis question number 1. Based on the editorial cartoons by Alfred McCoy, what kind of society did the Filipinos had during the American era? It illustrates the transition from a Catholic-centered Spanish-Filipino society to an imperial American assimilated one. And its complications were also depicted in the cartoons. The cartoons also illustrated the conditions of poor Filipinos in the Philippines now governed by the United States. The other cartoons depict how Americans controlled Filipinos through seemingly harmless American objects. The analysis states the cartoons often depicted the unequal wealth distribution in the Philippines during the American era, with the wealthy living lavish lifestyles while the poor suffered. Also, many of the cartoons also highlighted the lack of political representation in the Philippines during the American era, with the U.S. government often disregarding the needs and concerns of the Filipino people. This suggests that the Filipino people had little control over their own destiny, and were subject to the whims of foreign powers. There was also a focus on social inequality in the cartoons, with the elite living in luxury while the poor struggled to survive. Overall, the cartoons depict a society that was deeply unequal, politically unrepresentative, and subject to foreign influence. It's clear that there was much work to be done to build a more just and equitable society.
So, the selected cartoons illustrate not only the opinions of certain media outfits about the Philippine society during the American period, but also paint a broad image of society and politics under the United States. The cartoons also illustrated the conditions of poor Filipino in the Philippines now governed by the United States. So, in our today's generation, it shows that on how government controlled Filipino people, and how it shows how they are powerful. So, no one has a right to control the peaceful life of any other person.
period, no exceptions, government exists solely to control the lives of peaceful persons. Government, therefore, is inherently unjustified. The bigger problem is the faith that people have in government. They believe without basis that government is necessary, even good. They believe the absurd claim that without government we would be plagued with crime, never recognizing that government is.
I am Nicole E. Hapitana. So to continue, this is the analysis question number 3. What does the author want to convey or tell in these political caricatures? Political Caricatures of the American Era is a book authored by Alfred McCoy, an American professor of history and award-winning writer who dedicated his professional career on the research of Southeast Asian history, especially that of the Philippines, as well as the study of U.S. foreign policy. One of his dissertations tackled the factional conflict in the colonial economy of Iloilo, Philippines from 1937 to 1955. His interest in Filipino history allowed him to master the Hiligaynon dialect and understand the political situation not just of the region of Iloilo but of the entire country. The main purposes of the cartoon or caricature were to expose and publicize political issues in the Philippines during the American era. McCoy's interpretation of these cartoons points out the injustices and repression of political dissidents in the administration at that time. So next, we will proceed to number 4. Get a recent editorial cartoon and compare it with any of these political caricatures by McCoy. Discuss its similarity or difference. So the answer is the color in each picture makes a distinction between the two. As we can see in the first editorial cartoon, it has a vibrant and obvious message. In contrast, the second image is simply an antique rendition in which the photo's black and white color can be seen. The idea or topic of each of these editorial cartoons is one of the contrast between them. First off, it is clear from the first image that it is about the nationwide mass shootings, the majority of whom resulted in the deaths of unarmed civilians, both young and old. If so, what is being implied in the first image? In my interpretation, is a denial of the discussion around mass shootings because he took a piece of chicken out of hunger. The youngster in the second image is being apprehended by a police officer. We can also observe that a man who is in difficult leads the police away from the kid because he urges them to concentrate on individuals who know how to steal and are skilled at doing so instead of the kid who is picking pockets. These two editorial cartoons have one thing in common. They both convey a strong message about the general state of affairs in various sections of the nation where we must treat every person equally, regardless of where they sit in government. So that's all for the analysis question. For the conclusion, the main purposes of the cartoon or caricature were to expose and publicize political issues in the Philippines during the American era. McCoy's interpretation of his cartoons points out the injustices and repression of political dissidents in the administration at that time. His extensive research in Philippine and American archives provides a comprehensive background in presenting opinion. His presentation of these issues and conflicts offers an understanding of the Philippine state, specifically socio-political issue and scandals. McCoy provides historically embedded stories contemporary to Philippine state, to which future researchers may use to examine the flow of Philippine politics. Rosas also discusses political and social issues. He uses his art to represent the feelings of the people with every powerful message hidden in his caricature. His opinions and views of people regarding politics are also rooted on opinions and views of officials in government. In general, political cartoons are representations of the current conditions of our country. They are usually presented with amusement, but they are meant to persuade readers or audience to think about the condition of the country and may sway readers' opinion about certain issues.
And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.